call the honourable member for Fisher.
Thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on this legislation with a mix of support and concern. Several months in, and we have one of those rare opportunities to debate a bill which the Labor Party actually prepared themselves under the guise of their own policies. That is, it's a rare situation where it's not a carbon copy of coalition policy. And we can tell that it's not coalition policy because while the opposition speaks about unlocking opportunities for young people and supporting those in need of housing support, this bill does not deliver that. That is the mark of a Labor government. Pledges, platitudes and promises, and then dithering, delays and non-deliveries. In fact, while I've been on my feet in this place, I've said, Labor, what do? They promise you the world, and what do they give you? They give you an atlas. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, in a moment I'll address each of the bills individually, but I want to show the contrast between the Coalition's approach to housing and that of this government. During our last 3 years in government, the Coalition, its policies, its housing policies, supported more than 300,000 Australians with the purchase of a home. Let me say that again. In the last term of a Coalition government, more than 300,000 Australians were assisted in the purchase of a home. Now, on this side of the House, we believe in the Menzies tradition of the great Australian dream, of trying to enable as many Australians as humanly possible to be able to afford to buy their own home. And we had some terrific policies. The Home Guarantee Program. And I should point out that the now Shadow Assistant Treasurer and Shadow Housing Minister did an absolutely sterling job when he was the minister in these portfolios. But the Home Guarantee Program supported eligible first home buyers to purchase a new or existing home with a deposit as low as 5%. Now, as most of us would know, you ordinarily need a loan-to-value ratio of 80-20. So you need a 20% deposit. But what the Coalition, when we're in government, our policy enabled people to buy their own home by effectively the federal government guaranteeing the performance of that 15%. It enabled people to be able to get in with as little as 5% deposit. And most young people will tell you that their biggest impediment to buying a home is saving a sufficient deposit. And this bill, our policy, the Coalition government's policy in the Home Guarantee Program answered that problem. Over 10,400 Queenslanders benefited from this scheme. 52% of these were women. 52% were women, and 20% were essential workers, such as teachers and nurses. Now, we all know that housing is a huge problem in this country. For a country that is so incredibly huge, one almost finds it incredulous that housing would be such a problem. But when it comes to supply is one of the biggest problems that we have, and red tape. And many of those supply and red tape issues are driven by state planning instruments and local governments. But this Home Guarantee Program, as I said, 10,400 Queenslanders benefited from it. Many of them, 52% were women and 20% were essential workers. The Family Home Guarantee went even better. the Family Home Guarantee empowered single-parent families with children to buy their first home or to re-enter the housing market with a deposit as low as 2%. This was a scheme which delivered real outcomes for the long-term financial security and housing security for single-parent families. And just like many young people who would say, and still say, that their biggest impediment was the size of or their inability to be able to raise a deposit of 20%, single parents who often struggle financially to be able to make ends meet find it very, very difficult to be able to save up that deposit. But with the Family Home Guarantee, the coalition government provided meaningful support to people who were in difficult positions. Now, 85% of the recipients of the Family Home Guarantee were single mums. 85%. We didn't just talk the talk on delivering for Australians. We delivered it. Because that is what good governments do. Through the First Home Super Saver scheme, we helped 27,600 first home buyers accelerate their deposits through super, recognising that their super is their money. And through the Home Builder program, everybody would remember the Home Builder program. I can remember being on the other side in this place when the then Minister for Housing, the Assistant Minister, introduced the necessary legislation to kick off the Home Builder program. And the now Treasurer, who was the then Shadow Treasurer, stood here and said, "This program will never work." The now Treasurer lambasted the Home Builder program and said it'll never work. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, coming from the building industry, I had building industry colleagues and friends come to me and plead with me in around about March or April of 2020 that we needed to do something to spur the construction industry along, because they were facing an economic cliff come around about August of 2020. Their contracts were drying up, and to his credit, the now Shadow Assistant Treasurer came up in conjunction with industry bodies, the Home Builder program. Now, we were able to support 30,000 Queenslanders into building their homes under this package. Homes in new estates like Baringa and Narimba and Palmview and Boccarina in the electorate of Fisher. Through Home Builder alone. Now, this was a terrific, not just providing homes for people, but providing unbelievably successful economic stimulus during the COVID-19 pandemic. A $120 billion boost to the economy, supporting nearly 375,000 full-time jobs. And the now Treasurer, who's responsible for guiding this country through difficult economic times, stood up here in the chamber and said it'll never work. Even in opposition, today we are pushing for housing reform. We've announced our Super Home Buyer scheme, which will allow first home buyers to invest up to 40% of their superannuation, up to a maximum of $50,000, to help with the purchase of their first home. That is what a coalition government does. And those opposite, they just don't get. They don't get it, do they? They don't get that it's people's own money. The current government think they know better. And I'll take the interjection, because they think that superannuation is the plaything of the Labor Party, and it's not. It's people's hard-earned money, and for great programs like this that enable people to be able to get out of the rent race and be able to get in and buy their own first home, this is a good policy. This is what a coalition government will do. It's what we have done. We back aspirational Australians. We back Australians who want to ensure that their families have a better quality of life. This policy will help build the economy. It makes the Australian dream a reality for many, not the privileged few. Now, after 9 years of good government, record investment, reform and real outcomes for everyday Australians, the housing sector came through the challenges of COVID-19 and a global financial crisis. Yet Labor appears intent to dismantle our good work. Let's take a look at the Housing Australia Future Fund Bill of 2023. This is a bill which will require $10 billion of Commonwealth government borrowing. It'll cost the Commonwealth as much as $400 million a year in interest servicing costs. And that's at today's rate. And we all know what's happening with rates. $400 million per year on interest. Imagine where that money could be better spent. Now is not the time to plunge our country into unnecessary debt to fund a social policy experiment. Increased borrowing at this rate will only increase inflationary pressures on mum and dads right now. The more this government spends, the more inflationary pressures it places upon the economy. And what that will do is it will see more interest rate rises, and already we are seeing the average Australian home, the average Australian mortgage, when some 800,000 fixed-rate mortgages go into and become variable rates, when those fixed-rate loans expire, the average Australian will be paying $16,000 more in their mortgage payments. Now, that is in a circumstance where many Australians now, the cost of living is incredibly difficult on their family budgets. Putting aside mortgage payments, increase in transport costs, energy costs, food costs, everybody's feeling it. But how many average Australian families are going to be able to afford, in many cases, overnight, to pay an additional $16,000 a year in increase in interest payments? Labor is already out of its depth in attempting to address the cost of living in this cost of living crisis facing Australians and their businesses, and this bill will only make it worse. There is a lack of detail in this bill. Once again, this government is attempting to implement a significant reform without providing Australians with the information that they need and deserve. This has become an ongoing trend. Crucial questions that go to the heart of the Australian economy and Australian ethos cannot be left unanswered. There's no investment mandate that has been released by this government, meaning that scrutiny on and information about the fund's capability is restricted. This means that the legislation is essentially just a shell. It is empty. It is vacuous, like this government's entire housing policy agenda. The bill promises to address social housing, affordable housing and acute housing, but it absolutely fails to define what those three terms mean. And despite providing a 5-year review timeframe and limits of annual drawdowns, there are no performance criteria and no details about the review mechanism. Once again, we're being asked to vote on a bill without detail. It is Labor creating policy on the run. Once again, they are building the aircraft as it's running down the runway. On these two issues alone, the Australian people would expect the coalition to vote against this bill. But when you put it into the context of the government's housing agenda, the false promises and failures would cast doubt even in the minds of those who lent Labor their vote at the last election. After 9 months in office, I asked the government, where are the 30,000 new social and affordable homes that you promised? Where is your Help to Buy program that you said would commence on the 1st of January 2023? What are you doing to address supply chain shortages for building materials? How are you supporting the interstate and international migration of skilled workforces for construction? What are you doing about increasing rents, which have grown by 10.2%, setting a new record?